Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. We thought we'd do a 77 day wrap of our time in Europe. We're just about to leave Portugal, I guess, on Monday, and it is Friday, almost Friday night here. That's why the wine's flowing. And we thought we'd just do a little wrap up of not only our Portugal experience, but sort of, what this whole experience so far has been like. And give you a bit of an idea, and hopefully it'll lead to some questions and some discussion we can have down the road. So let's get started.
Cheers.
Okay, so I guess should we talk first about what what it means to us to do this, like why we're doing this, and what the what the
good place to
is.
start.
So when we came back from Texas, as most of you know, we came back and we sold our house in Texas. We did not buy a house here in Calgary. We decided we'd rent for a year, kind of just to give us the flexibility to do this. We'd been watching some YouTubers for a while and thought about, could we do long-term travel and what would that look like? But we certainly couldn't do it if we owned a house. So when we moved back, we said we'll rent for a year, see how we feel when that year's up, and if we want to do this. And as it turned out, everything worked out great, and we did. So we packed up, put everything in storage when our lease expired, and then May the 3rd, I guess, we headed down here to do this. So for us, it's, I think I have said this several times, and I don't want to sound repetitive, but for us it was a little bit about just living somewhere else. We weren't trying to make this be a big vacation or touristy thing. Neither of us are really all that into doing that kind of stuff. But I think our goal was primarily to just try living in other cities, right? And
save some money.
Yeah, and hopefully save some money, which we'll talk about in a second too. But it was so we're not doing, I guess, what you would think a lot of you might think we'd be doing. We're not going on a lot of tours. We're not doing a lot of stuff really outside the city for the most part. We're doing things that are generally close by, and just trying to kind of integrate ourselves here and see what it's like to live a daily life. The life here is a little bit more interesting than it was at home. We're walking a lot more because we don't have a car. There's a lot of things we've just never seen, so we are doing a lot of wandering around and that kind of stuff, but we're not necessarily spending our time kind of looking for touristy things to do. So we've avoided that, I would say, for the most part. Eh?
Yeah, we've hit some of the highlights that are walkable from where we are in our Airbnb, both when we were in Lisbon and since we've been in Porto. But essentially, we're not running into every church. We're not going into every cathedral. We're not doing museums. We're just kind of living, and Dan kind of finds us destinations for walking, and as you've seen, most of those turn out to be some really awesome parks, and that's kind of what we do on a day-to-day basis, not being a tourist.
And of course, I'm still working, so
Dan's
what makes the days kind of interesting, right? So we've been away, and I've worked remotely in Hawaii lots of years. We did that for quite a few years. But that was a bit different because we were on the other side, right? We were on the west side, so the time zones were earlier. Here we're in a time zone where my work doesn't start till 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's a little bit different, but we've been able to make it work, I would say. And it actually hasn't really been as hard as I thought it would be. I thought it would be a lot more challenging. But let's talk a little bit about costs. We said we were going to get into that. We're not doing a full breakdown of our costs or anything. We're not going to that. But we did just want to talk about like how we can do this and why, I guess, not being a tourist sort of feeds into the cost side, as Heather mentioned earlier. Like we have found, so when we came back to Canada, we were renting and we were renting a house. And we had all the costs that's sort of associated with that. So of course we had our lease, we had our monthly rent, but we also had insurance, and we had utilities, and we had gas, and we had like all the car stuff sort of related to that, and a lot of costs that sort of add up. So what we were trying to figure out is, can we do this and maintain something similar to our cost profile that we had when we were living at home? And I think, as it turns out, we can actually do it cheaper in some ways. I think our base costs, for the most part, sort of add up, right? So you know, we're when you think about what our rent used to be and what our groceries and all that stuff, it's kind of a wash. We're in this similar situation here from that perspective.
Yeah, we eat out a lot more here, but it's not necessarily more expensive to eat out here, and that causes us to do a lot less cooking in. But we have kind of been able to get a pretty good program of what we do eat when we eat in, and that also lends us to really buying groceries about every 2 days. So we're really not stocking up, which is really hard for me because I've had big fridges and freezers, and I always wanted to stock up. We're not going to talk about that toilet paper issue, but and it's really hard because when we do grocery shopping here, I want to go, oh, well, what about we have something for a meal next week? And we really only, as it turns out, we need to buy groceries for today and tomorrow. So it's brought our grocery bill down, and we're very much more aware of what we're buying for groceries instead of just kind of grazing and buying.
And I think probably the biggest single savings, because we actually are winding up saving a fair bit of money here that we were never able to save at home. And I think a big chunk of that is we can't buy anything. So, you know, people laugh but add up all of your purchases that are sort of spontaneous day-to-day purchases. Your Amazon, your Home Depot, your
Go shopping in the mall.
whatever. Yeah, like the stuff that you would do just to accumulate stuff. We would pretty much most months chew up whatever leftover money we had and just do that. And didn't even think twice about it, right? That's how you accumulate storage lockers full of stuff over time. We can't do that. So to be honest with you, I think we're probably, you know, like we're probably saving at least a couple of grand a month, if not maybe 3, on just miscellaneous junk that we would buy, right? And I certainly wasn't junk at the time when we thought about it, but just things that we would buy on a day-to-day basis, probably more out of boredom than out of necessity. We don't have that problem here because we only have one suitcase each, and it has to weigh less than 50 pounds. So
I was just going to add that we have both agreed that if we're going to buy something in the way of clothes, something has to get left behind. So we really haven't bought any clothes. When we left Lisbon, I probably left a good, 10 pounds worth of clothes left on a magic recycling garbage can top. I'm positive I saw my sandals go in one of the houses next door on some local lady's feet, but we quickly realized in that first month that we had just brought too much. Now, we still both have a full suitcase each, but we made ourselves promise that if we need to buy something, something has to be left behind. And so far we've been able to stick to it.
I think that's helped a lot. And then I think the other benefit, like obviously the one challenge here is airfare. That's a big cost that's different than we would have at home. I think the main benefit for us has been the only expensive airfare here really is the airfare to get to Europe. Other than that, it's pretty cheap to get around, and we're not doing it that often, right? We'll spend a total of 80 days here in Portugal, right? So it's not like we're traveling a whole lot.
No, and I do have to add that because of our Schengen shuffle, which is why we're now heading to Ireland, some of our locations are not conducive to taking the train from one place to another, which is significantly cheaper than flying. It just is what it is. So we have flown from right now location to location, and that includes from Porto to Ireland. We have to fly through Lisbon, but it is what it is. You can't get there by train. Well, you can, but it takes about 24 hours to dick around with that. So we're just going to fly. But it's not easy because of where we're going based on our Schengen shuffle. And for those of us who know us, know kind of what that is.
Well, we'll do a video on that too, so people can understand. Like, the basic premise is we can't stay inside the EU mostly for more than 90 days, and we have to find countries that are outside of this Schengen zone to spend 90 days in. So that's what we're doing. But okay. Anyways, let's move on and let's start talking about this trip so far. So we've spent 77 days here. We've broken it roughly in half. The first half in Lisbon, Portugal, which is the capital, and then we moved to Porto. I think overall, well, let's talk first about Lisbon and
Bigger city.
yeah. What are your thoughts?
Bigger
Start.
city. When we arrived, we stayed in a hotel for a couple of nights just to get over the jet lag, and the hotel was kind of in the center of the city. And after that, we moved down into a more local area, which was really only about a 10-minute walk from the waterfront. Lisbon was a challenge because of the hills. Its nickname is the City of Seven Hills, and they are some monster hills. We have posted pictures, and if it's not hills, it's staircases. And it was a bit of a challenge. You just can't go anywhere but either walking up or walking down, and they are significant. It's also, I thought it was a bit of a gritty city. When we were in Barcelona, I don't know, at this point, many years ago, every morning the shopkeepers were out front hosing down their sidewalks. It just seemed clean. Now here, nobody tends to wash their sidewalks. I have commented, there's a lot of dog poop. Nobody seems to pick up after their dogs. But you kind of get used to that. You got to watch where you're walking anyway. But overall, we landed in a pretty local location, and we did find some pretty local stuff that we like to do, and dealt with a lot less tourists than when we were in the center of the city. So overall, I felt Lisbon was okay.
So that when we were in Belém, we could walk to the river, and we were kind of in a very, I guess, like more residential neighborhood. I didn't find it that gritty there. We did have the dog poop issue, but there wasn't that much. The grittiness was kind of contained. Like on the river was really nice. It was quite clean and stuff. But when we were in town, it was much worse. Porto shares some of those things, but it also has some pros and cons that we'll talk about. They're a little different as well. But it definitely, I think the high points for Lisbon for me was the river. Where we were out at the river, even though it was touristy, there was a couple of monuments out at the river. It was just a very nice, spacious, not as crowded river walk to walk on.
Yeah.
And it was really, and being in the residential neighborhood was quite pleasant, I thought. Like we had lots of nice walks that were easy to do, and not a lot of people around in the residential neighborhood.
I'll just add one comment. All along the river was very flat, so we were able to walk down every morning downhill to our to the world famous Pastéis de Belém and have our espresso and pastéis every morning, and then we could then walk right out to the waterfront, and it was about a half an hour walk that we could do, and it was very flat, which was very nice. It was really nice.
So then we decided to go to Porto. We took a quick trip to London in between, but we came back to Porto. I think the advantage of Porto, it's got a lot of advantages, and I mean, we'll be blunt. We prefer Porto over Lisbon. I think both of us
Agreed
across the board. But the advantages of Porto are, first of all, its size. It's not as big. The area that we're in is very central to everything. There's no, the longest walk, I think, really for anything touristy would be half an hour each way, something like that. But it has its own challenges, right? So it's not like Lisbon in the sense that there's not hills everywhere. So if we choose where we want to walk, we can avoid them. If you don't go down to the river, there's really no hill that you have to deal with. The hill is really one big river valley, and then everything from the river up our way is just one kind of steady incline. So if you go, if we follow parallel to the river up here, we don't really have to deal with any hills at all, which makes it easy to do long walks kind of east and west from where we are. And I think that part's nice.
Yeah.
I like that. The grittiness is still here. I would say the biggest thing we've noticed, and keep in mind, we got to Lisbon in May, and we basically got to Porto in early June. It's been getting progressively busier from a tourism perspective as we get closer and closer to summer. So when we were in Lisbon, it was still quite early, and we didn't really hit the touristy stuff, but it still seemed crazy busy in Lisbon. Porto, when we got here, seemed so nice and quiet, and it's gradually gotten busier and
Agreed.
busier and
Yeah.
busier as we go. With the busyness comes problems, right? It's just generally a little bit dirtier, generally a little bit harder to get around. There's a lot of sort of homeless that seem to travel with the tourists, right? So, when the tourism gets higher, the homelessness problems get a little bit higher. It's still much better than say downtown Calgary is. Like you can wander around here and it's not, there's not addicts fighting with the sky or whatever everywhere. You just see the odd, kind of the odd homeless person, and there are some beggars that roam around and stuff that we do run into occasionally. It's still, like I say, it's better, but it is, it's something we've noticed as the tourism has gone up, that homelessness problem's going up.
Our Airbnb is on a small connection street, and there seems to be a homeless guy, but he directs traffic. So if somebody's driving down our little one-way street and he sees a parking spot, he feels very confident in directing them into the parking spot, and then off they go. It's kind of funny, actually. He's been out there directing traffic almost every day that we go out. And they seem to rotate. There's 3 or 4 of them.
So that was kind of our experience in Porto. So I guess if it, as we kind of alluded to, where would we stay again? I'm assuming
Porto.
Yeah, it's Porto for me too. It's just smaller. It's easier. There's lots of neat stuff to see here. A couple of things we didn't talk about actually with Porto that are a big advantage. When we were in Lisbon, there's kind of 2 choices. So restaurants are a big part of what we want to do. And we both like to eat out. We like trying different foods and whatnot. The problem we had with Lisbon is you had 2 very different experiences. You had the tourist experience in the core, which was very touristy food, where the guys are flagging you in and trying to show you their menu and all that stuff. Most of those restaurants are not very good. and they are expensive. Out in our suburban sort of area, we did have a few local ones which were really good, but they all have that Portugal thing of, they open for lunch and then they shut down till like 7 or 8 o'clock, and then they open again for dinner. And we thought we could adjust to that in Portugal, but with my work schedule and everything else, it just hasn't worked out. We haven't been able to adjust to, eating at 9 o'clock or at 10 o'clock at night, which is kind of the custom here. So when we were out in the residential neighborhood, we wound up having to eat in a fair bit because we didn't have restaurants that were sort of available to us without walking 3 or 4 kilometers to find one. In Porto, that problem has solved itself for us. We've got lots of restaurants around because we're right in the core and it's not as big. The restaurants aren't as touristy. There's a lot more selection for us, and we haven't had any trouble with the time of day. There's a handful of Portuguese restaurants that are open late, but the rest are open basically at hours that we would want to eat at 6 o'clock or that sort of thing.
And it's a wide variety. It's not all Portuguese food. We've had quite a good selection of Portuguese food, but there's also a nice selection of just other food as well. So we found a couple of pubs that we like. We've found a couple of delis that we like for lunch. We have our very favorite cafe for breakfast, our pastiche and our espresso, and we've been able to settle in kind of into restaurant scene that we like. Now, one other thing that Dan, I'm going to jump on that Dan hasn't mentioned yet with the hours is quite frequently a restaurant's just not open. We went to our favorite deli the other day. Supposed to be open at 11:30. Nope, just closed at lunch.
Yeah, I think that's a big problem. Everybody uses Google. We're not the only ones. All these places are on Google. They have their hours on Google.
They have their menus on Google.
But quite often they don't follow the hours that are on Google, so they don't update Google with whatever their daily hours are. So you can walk somewhere thinking this is great. I want to go to this restaurant. Get there and it is closed that day for no real explainable reason. And you got to go find an alternative and figure it out. So that has been a little bit interesting. And I don't think Lisbon or Porto, there's no change there.
No.
We had that experience in both places, so it does happen. But I mean, we like Porto enough. Not only the Airbnb that we're staying in, which we love. The host is fantastic. I think I've mentioned that before. But I think we actually have decided we would come back and spend 90 days here, especially if we were outside of the busy tourist months.
Agreed.
I think, right?
Agreed.
It's Until maybe about a week or two ago, it was amazing here. Like it just the tourists sort of flooded in, and it got busier and a little bit more challenging. But before that, it was amazing.
It was wonderful. Part of the problem is the streets are really probably 80% of the streets are not wide enough for 3 people. So you just can't walk beside each other. You have to walk in front of each other. And I must say, I do at times quite enjoy hip checking some gal's purse because they're walking 2 or 3 across the sidewalk. But once it gets busy, it's incredibly crowded. But you can also, that being said, you can also walk 1 street over and there's nobody on it. So, but we would definitely avoid the summer months next time.
Okay, so next up, we're off to Ireland. We're headed to Dublin on Monday, so that should be interesting. There's a couple more videos that we have to put together that we haven't finished yet from Portugal that I will get edited and get put out. We're just a little behind on that. But we will be heading to Ireland, and we'll see what that all is like. It'll be a very different experience. The weather's not going to be as hot, and it's going to be a little bit rainier. But we'll see what it goes like. So, I guess that's that. So, let's celebrate in Portuguese custom.
Happy Sao João.